The people trying to kill me didn't break down my door. They used a key I gave them and called me Mom. The bottle they gave me was beautiful. It was heavy, sea green glass, with a minimalist white label and a cork stopper that made a satisfying pop when you opened it. It looked like something you'd find in an exclusive spa. A gift of wellness. A promise of a longer life. It wasn't until my cat, Percy, lapped water from a glass on my nightstand that I understood what it really was. It was a coffin, meticulously designed and lovingly presented. The people who tried to kill me weren't monsters lurking in the shadows. It all began, as so many tragedies do, around a perfectly set dinner table. 3 weeks earlier, my Boston home was filled with the rich, comforting scent of rosemary chicken and old books. The late Sunday afternoon sun streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm glow on the polished mahogany of the dining table. This house, with its creaking floors and shelves groaning under the weight of history texts, had been my sanctuary since my husband, Richard, passed. It was quiet, perhaps too quiet, but it was mine. My world, however, truly came alive when my son, Leo, and his wife, Isabel, were in it. Mom, this is incredible. Seriously. Michelin star level, Leo said, his mouth full of roasted potatoes. He had Richard's easy smile, but lately, I'd noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was a tension in his jaw, a subtle restlessness in the way his leg bounced under the table. It's just a simple roast. Darling, I said, refilling his wine glass. The familiar ritual warmed me from the inside out. Eleanor, you have to stop saying that, Isabel chimed in, her voice as smooth and curated as her Instagram feed. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her rings expensive. You're simple is what people aspire to. It's authentic. It's real. Isabel, or Izzy as her millions of followers knew her, was a vision of modern wellness. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Her yoga clothes looked more expensive than my finest suit, and she radiated a kind of relentless, manufactured positivity. As a wellness influencer, her life was a performance of health and happiness, and she played her part flawlessly. She slid a beautiful paper bag across the table. Speaking of which, we brought you something. Inside was the sea green bottle. It's a new synergistic blend, she explained, her eyes gleaming with evangelical fervor. Ashwagandha for stress, hawthorn berry for cardiac support, a touch of ginkgo for cognitive clarity. It's all bioavailable and ethically sourced. We just want you to be with us for a long time, Eleanor. Her words were sweet, a loving sentiment from a caring daughter-in-law. So why did a sudden, inexplicable chill trace its way down my spine? I dismissed it as a draft from the old window. Oh, Izzy, you shouldn't have, I said, admiring the bottle. This looks far too expensive. Nothing's too expensive when it comes to your health, Leo said, a little too quickly. You've always taken care of me. Now it's our turn to take care of you. His phone buzzed on the table, and the screen lit up. He glanced at it, and the strained smile on his face vanished, replaced by a flash of raw panic. He quickly flipped the phone over. Sorry, he mumbled, clearing his throat. Work. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, he stood up abruptly. I have to take this. Excuse me for 1 second. He walked into the hallway, but the old house carried whispers. I tried to focus on Izzy, who was now explaining the benefits of intermittent fasting, but I could hear the low, urgent murmur of Leo's voice. I caught only fragments, sharp and jagged. Told you. I'll have it by the end of the month. A pause. No, that's not an option. Listen, the deal is almost closed. It's a sure thing. Just give me 2 more weeks. A history professor learns to read between the lines. to find the truth in the spaces between the recorded facts. The desperation in my son's voice was a historical document all its own, telling a story of debt and fear. He came back to the table moments later, his face pale, but the charming smile was plastered back in place. He saw me looking at him, a question in my eyes, and he deflected it beautifully. "Sorry about that, Mom. A client who doesn't understand the concept of a weekend." He laughed, a hollow sound that didn't echo in the quiet room. They left soon after, armed with leftovers and showering me with air kisses and promises to call the next day. I stood at the front door and watched Leo's leased BMW disappear down the tree-lined street, the familiar ache of their absence settling in. The house, once filled with their bright, loud energy, was now cavernously silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to mock the frantic beat of my own heart. I walked back into the kitchen and saw the green bottle sitting on the granite countertop, gleaming under the recessed lighting. It was a beautiful object, a testament to their love and concern. It was everything a mother could want. So why did it feel like a warning? I pushed the thought away, chiding myself for being a cynical old woman. My son loved me. My daughter-in-law was kind and generous. They were worried about my health. That was all. There was no subtext to analyze, no hidden meaning to decipher. That night, I went through my evening routine. I locked the doors, tidied the kitchen, and checked on Percy, who was curled into a perfect orange circle on the foot of my bed. Before turning in, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the bottle one last time. For a long, long time, Eleanor, wanting to prove my own foolish suspicions wrong, wanting, more than anything, to believe in the simple, uncomplicated love of my child. I popped the cork stopper. I shook one of the small, grayish capsules into my palm, filled a glass with water, and swallowed. It went down easy, tasteless, a promise of a healthy future. For the first week, I was a diligent student of my own wellness. Every morning, with my coffee, I'd take one of the little gray capsules. The first few days, I noticed nothing. Then, a subtle shift began, a quiet tampering with the chemistry of my own body. A strange, metallic tang would linger on my tongue after breakfast. When I stood up too quickly from my armchair, the room would tilt for a moment, the edges of my vision blurring into a soft vignette, as if I were looking at the world through an old-fashioned camera. I attributed it to age. I was 68. After all, the body keeps its own unsparing historical record. Izzy's texts were a daily ritual, little bursts of digital cheer that felt increasingly disconnected from my physical reality. Day 3. Eleanor, how are you feeling? Remember to hydrate. Wellness is a journey, not a destination. XO. Day 5. Noticed you have more energy yet? The adaptogens are starting to work their magic. Keep it up. More energy? I felt a profound, bone-deep weariness that my afternoon naps couldn't touch. It wasn't the satisfying exhaustion that comes after a long day of gardening. It was a heavy, leaden fatigue, as if gravity had a stronger claim on me than anyone else. I would sit down to read Thucydides and find my eyes closing after a single page, the complex sentences blurring into meaningless squiggles. It was a Tuesday evening, 10 days after I'd started the supplements, that fate stopped knocking and kicked the door in. Rain lashed against the windows of my study, the wind howling a mournful tune through the old eaves of the house. I felt particularly unsteady that evening, a persistent wave of nausea cresting in my stomach. I remembered Izzy mentioning that the capsules could be dissolved in water for faster absorption. Perhaps, I thought, taking it with a full glass would be easier on my system. I went up to my bedroom, filled a heavy crystal tumbler with water from the carafe on my nightstand, and dropped the capsule in. It fizzed slightly before dissolving, turning the water cloudy. I placed it on the nightstand, intending to drink it after I changed for bed. But the effort of the day suddenly overwhelmed me. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my head in my hands, waiting for the dizziness to pass. That's when Percy jumped onto the bed. My beautiful ginger cat, my silent companion for the last 8 years. The warm, purring presence that had filled the empty spaces Richard left behind. He head-butted my hand. A soft, insistent demand for affection. I smiled, stroking his back. He then hopped gracefully onto the nightstand, as he often did, and before I could even think to stop him, he lowered his head and began lapping at the cloudy water in the glass. Percy, no. Sweetie, that's... But it was too late. He'd only taken a few laps. What happened next will be burned into my memory for whatever time I have left. He froze, his body going rigid. A low, guttural cry, a sound I had never heard a living creature make, tore from his throat. He stumbled backwards off the nightstand, landing on the floor with a heavy thud. His small body began to convulse violently, his legs kicking out at nothing, his back arching unnaturally. A primal scream caught in my own throat. I scrambled to him, gathering his seizing body in my arms. He felt alien, his muscles hard as rock, his eyes wide with a terror and confusion that mirrored my own. I wrapped him in a blanket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number for the 24-hour emergency vet. The clinic was a blur of sterile white walls and the antiseptic smell of fear. Dr. Sharma, a kind woman with tired, compassionate eyes, worked on him frantically, but there was nothing she could do. I watched through a small glass window as my beloved companion's life was extinguished by an invisible, aggressive poison. Dr. Sharma sat with me in a small, quiet room afterward, her face etched with professional frustration. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I have to be honest with you. I don't know what caused this. The symptom progression was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was a catastrophic cardiac and neurological event. We ran a preliminary toxicology screen for common household poisons, antifreeze, rat poison, toxic plants, and found nothing. It's as if his own system simply, violently, shut down. The drive home was a silent, hollowed-out affair. The rain had stopped, and the wet streets glistened under the streetlights. The house felt impossibly empty without Percy's welcome meow at the door. I walked in, numb with grief, and called Leo. I needed my son. I needed his comfort. Mom, it's late. Is everything okay? My voice was a raw whisper. It's Percy. He's gone. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Oh, Mom, that's just awful. I'm so sorry. His voice was flat, distant, the correct words delivered without the melody of genuine emotion. He was old, though, right? I mean, he had a good, long life. These things happen. I could hear Izzy's muffled voice in the background. What is it? Then, closer to the phone. Oh, poor Percy. Tell her we're so sorry. At least he's not suffering anymore. At least he's not suffering anymore. He wasn't suffering at all until 2 hours ago. He was vibrant. He was alive. Their words, meant to be comforting, felt like a gross dismissal, a hasty tidying up of an inconvenient emotion. My grief was an untidy mess they wanted to sweep under the rug. I have to go. Mom, Leo said. Big day tomorrow. We'll come by this weekend. Okay? We'll bring dinner. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I stood in the dead center of my living room. The silence, a crushing weight. These things happen. The vet's confusion. My dizziness. My fatigue. Izzy's relentless cheer. Leo's panicked phone call. The deal is almost closed. It's a sure thing. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me back up the stairs and into my bedroom. The half-full glass of cloudy water was still on the nightstand. A death sentence Percy had intercepted. My gaze shifted from the glass to the elegant, sea-green bottle on my dresser. A gift of wellness. A promise of a longer life. It wasn't a coincidence. The thought, once a fleeting, paranoid whisper, was now a scream. The historian in me, trained to find patterns, to connect disparate events into a coherent narrative, saw it all with a sudden, sickening clarity. This wasn't a story about aging or a tragic accident. It was a story about a plot. My body wasn't failing. It was being attacked. The deep, wrenching grief for my lost friend was now joined by a new, colder companion, the paralyzing fear that I was meant to be next. The morning after Percy died, I woke to a house that felt fundamentally wrong. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sounded like a threat. The fear was a living thing, a cold dread that had settled deep in my bones. But alongside it, something else was taking root, a historian's instinct. When faced with an incomprehensible horror, you do not run. You research. My first act was one of quiet rebellion. I went to the sea green bottle, shook out a single gray capsule, and carried it not to my lips, but to the bathroom. I watched it swirl in the toilet bowl before pressing the handle. The decisive flush was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a declaration of war. I did not take a capsule that day, or the next, or the next. The change was not immediate, but it was undeniable. By the second morning, the metallic taste in my mouth was gone. By the third day, the fog in my mind began to lift, like a morning mist burning off under a strong sun. When I stood up from my chair, the world remained blessedly stable. The weariness receded, replaced by the familiar energy that had always defined me. My body, my own primary source, and was giving me its testimony. It had been under siege, and now, the siege was lifted. The grief for Percy was a sharp, constant ache, but I channeled it. It became the fuel for a cold, methodical resolve. I began my investigation where all historians do, with the primary artifact, the bottle. I examined it under the bright light of my desk lamp. The label was a masterpiece of deceptive minimalism. Elysian Wellness. It read in a serene, elegant font. Below that, Synergistic Heart, Mind Formula. There was no list of ingredients, no FDA disclaimer, no manufacturing address or lot number. There was only a website. I sat at my husband's old desktop computer, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard, and typed in the address. The website loaded, a wash of soft pastels and smiling, ethnically diverse people performing yoga on sun-drenched beaches. It was filled with meaningless marketing jargon. Unlock your cellular potential. Harmonize your body's rhythm. Ancient wisdom. Modern results. It was all aesthetic and no substance. I searched for the company's corporate registration. It led me down a rabbit hole to a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box in Wyoming. It was a digital ghost. There was nothing real to grasp. For a moment, doubt crept back in. Was I just a grieving, paranoid old woman, weaving a conspiracy out of a slick marketing campaign and a tragic coincidence? I felt a wave of exhaustion. It would be so much easier to believe I was losing my mind than to accept that my own son was trying to kill me. Then I remembered the iPad. Leo and Izzy had bought it for me last Christmas. A sleek silver rectangle they left on the coffee table for convenience, so I could see the photos they posted online. I rarely touched it, preferring the heft of a real book. But I remembered Izzy using it to show me the Elysian Wellness website that first day. With a sense of dread, I picked it up. Its surface was cool and impersonal. I opened the web browser. The search history was a mundane portrait of their lives. Best brunch spots in Cambridge. Warriors game highlights. Izzy fit social blade stats. Nothing. My heart sank. I was wrong. I was crazy. I was about to put the device down when a memory from a decade ago surfaced, a guest lecture I'd hosted from a digital archivist for my graduate seminar. He'd talked about the ghosts that live inside machines, the data that never truly disappears. My hands trembled as I navigated to the browser's advanced settings. It took me 10 minutes of fumbling, my academic mind struggling with the infuriatingly non-intuitive interface. But I finally found it, a log of cleared search data, a list of digital whispers they thought they had silenced. I tapped it, and my world ended. The list that populated the screen was not a coincidence. It was a blueprint for murder. Tasteless poisons that mimic heart attack, oleander extract dosage, human fatal, most common prescription drug overdoses elderly, how to delete browser history permanently iPad, Elysian Wellness Cardiac Toxins Review, Massachusetts, inheritance law probate, waiting period, contesting a will, statute of limitations, life insurance payout suspicious death. I read the ist once, then twice. The words seemed to vibrate on the screen, malevolent and obscene. Oleander, a common garden plant, a beautiful, flowering shrub whose every part was a deadly cardiotoxin. The vet's words came rushing back, a catastrophic cardiac and neurological event. The iPad slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The air in the room became thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my own body together as a violent tremor shook me from the inside out. The image of Leo's smiling face, his earnest voice saying, "Now it's our turn to take care of you," flashed in my mind. No longer a memory of love, but a vision of unspeakable evil. This wasn't a sudden, rash decision on their part. This was a project. They had researched, planned, and sourced their weapon. While I was roasting chickens for them, they were calculating the precise dosage it would take to stop my heart. The first wave that hit me was pure, animal terror. The second was a grief so profound it felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. This was a deeper loss than Richard's death, a more painful wound than Percy's. This was the death of my son, not his body, but the memory of him. The very idea of him. The little boy who held my hand while crossing the street, the teenager I'd taught to drive, the young man I'd proudly watched graduate from college. That person had been murdered and replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen on the sofa, but as the afternoon light outside began to fade, something inside me shifted. The terror and grief did not disappear, but they receded, making way for a cold, hard clarity. I was a historian, and this was the most important historical event of my life. I would not be a passive victim in my own story. I would not let them turn me into a footnote in their greedy, sociopathic narrative. I needed to document. I needed to strategize. And I needed an ally. Going to the local police with a tablet full of search history felt like a fool's errand. They would see a distraught, elderly woman making wild accusations against her, charismatic, camera-ready children. They would see a family dispute, not attempted murder. I needed someone who would listen, someone who knew me, someone who understood the law. My mind raced, flipping through the card catalog of my past, through decades of students. A face emerged from the archives of my memory. A quiet, intensely serious young man from my History of American Law seminar 15 years ago. He was brilliant, with a mind that cut through nonsense like a razor. He'd written his final paper on the legal precedents of elder abuse cases in the 20th century. David Miller. I remembered seeing his name in the university alumni bulletin a few years back. He'd become a detective with the Boston Police Department. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was firm. I found my old, leather-bound address book, the one filled with the names of past students I'd mentored. I found his name. His parents' address was still listed. A few minutes of searching online, and I had it. His direct line at the precinct. I picked up the phone, the cold plastic slick in my palm. My fear was a roaring in my ears, but my voice, when I spoke to the dispatcher, was calm, steady, and clear. The voice of a professor who was about to deliver the most important lecture of her life. The precinct was out of the question. It was too official, too public. When I finally reached Detective David Miller, his voice was deeper than I remembered, professional and cautious. But he remembered me. Professor Vance? Of course. Your seminar on American legal history was the only reason I passed the bar exam. We agreed to meet at the Boston Public Library, a place of quiet, soaring spaces, and the hushed reverence of shared knowledge. It felt appropriate, a neutral ground where facts were respected. I found him in the reading room, surrounded by the comforting scent of aging paper and lemon polish. He was in his late 30s now, with the same sharp, observant eyes, but a new weariness around them that hadn't been there in his youth. He was a man who had seen too many of history's dark footnotes play out in real time. "Professor," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "It's good to see you. You said on the phone it was a complex problem." His professional skepticism was a palpable force in the quiet air between us. He was being respectful, but I knew what he was likely thinking. Another family dispute. Another lonely older person with a grievance. I knew that leading with my terrifying conclusion would get me dismissed as hysterical. A historian presents evidence, not conclusions. So I began my lecture. I laid it out for him chronologically, my voice even and academic. I started with the timeline of my symptoms, cross-referencing them with the date I began the supplements. I presented a printed copy of Dr. Sharma's baffling report on Percy's death. I placed the elegant sea-green bottle on the table between us. It looked obscene in the scholarly quiet of the library. Finally, I slid the iPad across the table. "The final exhibit," I said, my voice nearly breaking for the first time. "Their search history. They thought they deleted it." He picked up the tablet, his expression still carefully neutral. He read the first few entries: brunch spots, sports scores, and I saw a flicker of polite dismissal in his eyes. Then he kept scrolling. I watched his face as he read the list I now knew by heart. His posture changed. He leaned forward, the professional distance evaporating, replaced by a focused, predatory stillness. His gaze flicked from the screen to the bottle and then to my face. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, hard belief that was almost as terrifying as my own fear. "Oleander," he murmured, more to himself than to me. My God. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a former professor or a potential victim. He was looking at a survivor. "We need to arrest them," I whispered, the words sounding weak and desperate. David slid the iPad back to me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Eleanor, I believe you. 100%. But right now, we can't move." "What do you mean? It's all there." "What we have is a damning but circumstantial case," he explained, his voice low and firm. "We have a search history from a shared device. Their lawyer will argue anyone could have made those searches. We have a sick cat and a bottle of unregulated supplements. We can send the pills to the lab, and my gut tells me we'll find exactly what we think we will. But we can't definitively prove they gave them to you with the intent to kill. A good lawyer will paint this as a tragic accident, and you as a confused, grieving woman looking for someone to blame. They'll file for a competency hearing, and this will turn into a nightmare for you. To make this stick, we need more. We need them to make another move." A cold dread pooled in my stomach. "What kind of move?" His eyes held mine, and I saw the terrible weight of his request. "They think their plan is working. They think you're getting weaker, more confused. We need to let them think that. In fact, you need to help them think that. You need to play the part. You have to be the frail, trusting mother they're expecting. You have to keep taking their calls. You have to let them into your house. We need to give them the rope and see if they'll use it." He was asking me to walk back into the cage, to live alongside my own would-be executioners, to smile at them, to act the part of the victim as my heart hammered against my ribs. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever contemplated. And as I considered it, a memory, sharp and unwelcome, rose from the archives of my mind. I'm standing in the doorway of Richard's study, Leo is 16. The front of my sedan is crumpled like a piece of tin foil. Leo is pleading with me, his eyes wide with teenage panic. Mom, please, don't tell Dad. He'll kill me. I just took it for a spin. I was with my friends. I wasn't drinking, I swear. The other guy just came out of nowhere. And I hear my own voice, making the excuses that had become second nature. I see myself walking into the study and telling my husband that I'd had a fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. I see the relief on Leo's face. The gratitude that I now understood wasn't love, but the simple joy of a boy who had learned, once again, that actions have no consequences in his mother's house. I had spent a lifetime protecting him from the world. Now, I had to protect myself from him. All right, I said to David, my voice a stranger's. What do I have to do? The performance began that very evening. My phone rang, and Izzy's bright, sunny face appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered, forcing a quaver into my voice. Hello? Eleanor, I was starting to worry. How are you feeling today? Her voice chirped, dripping with manufactured concern. Oh, Izzy. Darling, I began, letting my voice sound faint and breathless. Not much better. I'm afraid. So very tired today. The dizziness. I let the sentence hang in the air, a deliberate display of weakness. I could almost hear the predatory glee in her voice, thinly veiled by a layer of sympathy. Oh, you poor thing. Don't you worry. That's just the supplements doing their deep work, clearing out all the toxins. The healing process can be intense. Leo and I will be over tomorrow. We'll bring you some of my homemade organic bone broth. You just rest. They were coming to check on their investment, to see if their poison was yielding a return. That would be lovely. Dear, I whispered. You two are so good to me. I hung up the phone and walked to the large bay window in the living room. The sun had set, and the glass reflected a distorted image of the room behind me, with my own face suspended in the darkness. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were wide with a fear I couldn't conceal, but her mouth was set in a hard, determined line. She was a historian who had found herself trapped in the pages of a horror story. And now, she had to write her own ending. For the next 10 days, my life became a piece of theater. I was the sole actor on a very lonely stage, and my audience was my own son. My home, once a sanctuary, was now my set. Each morning, I would wake up and put on my costume, an old, worn-out robe, slippers, my hair deliberately uncombed. I practiced walking with a slight shuffle, letting my hand tremble as I reached for a glass. When they called, I would let the phone ring a little longer each time, and when I answered, my voice was a carefully constructed tapestry of confusion and fatigue. Professor, you're a natural. Detective Miller had told me during one of our brief clandestine calls. But don't get complacent. They're getting impatient. He was right. Their visits grew more frequent, their mask of loving concern slipping to reveal the avarice beneath. They would arrive bearing soups and smoothies that I would praise effusively before pouring them down the drain the moment they left. Their questions became more pointed. Are you sure you're taking the supplements every day? Eleanor? Izzy asked one afternoon, her bright smile not quite masking the analytical glint in her eyes. On an empty stomach. Like I said? The clinical studies showed much more pronounced effects by week 3. The subtext hung in the air. Thick and poisonous. Why aren't you dying faster? Leo was worse. He would pace through the rooms, his gaze lingering on my husband's collection of maritime paintings, on the silver tea service, on the antique secretary desk. He wasn't looking at a home, he was taking inventory. He was a vulture, assessing the value of a carcass that was taking too long to die. The call I'd been waiting for came on a Thursday evening. It was Leo. His tone was different, stripped of the usual faux casual warmth. It was the sound of a businessman about to close a deal. Mom, he said, a note of forced gravity in his voice. We need to talk. About the future. Izzy and I are worried, and we've sought some professional advice. A friend of ours, a specialist, is going to come with us tomorrow to chat, just to help us make sure everything is in order for you. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The move Miller was waiting for. A cold, grim satisfaction mingled with the terror. A specialist? I asked, playing my part. What sort of specialist, dear? A doctor? Something like that. Mom, he said smoothly. He helps families plan. We'll see you at 10. The next morning, I set the stage. I left the breakfast dishes in the sink. A detail so out of character, for me it was a shout of incompetence. I put on my haziest expression and sat in the living room, a book upside down in my lap. When the doorbell rang, I shuffled to the door and opened it to find them. Leo and Izzy, flanking a man who seemed to have been born in a tailored sharkskin suit. He was tall, with silver hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. In his hand, he held a sleek leather briefcase. Mom, this is our friend, Mr. Davies, Leo said, guiding the man inside as if he owned the place. A pleasure to meet you, Eleanor, Mr. Davies said, his voice a low, condescending purr. Your children speak so highly of you. They're deeply concerned, and I'm just here to help put everyone's mind at ease. We sat in the living room, on the very sofa where I had read bedtime stories to Leo. The air was thick with unspoken intentions. Mr. Davies did the talking, his words a masterclass in weaponized legalese, all of it wrapped in the cloying language of concern. He spoke of proactive estate planning and simplifying your affairs, of alleviating the burdens of financial management during a period of what can be a confusing time. All the while, Leo and Izzy nodded along, their faces masks of deep, fraudulent sorrow. Then came the flourish. Mr. Davies placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with 2 sharp, metallic clicks. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, thick and imposing, and spread them out like a butcher displaying his cuts of meat. Given your recent health challenges, we've taken the liberty of drawing up a few documents to protect you, he said. This is a durable power of attorney, which would allow Leo to handle your banking. This is a new will, just to streamline the probate process and make sure your wishes are clearly documented, naming Leo and Isabel as sole beneficiaries. And this is an advance healthcare directive, appointing Isabel as your agent, so she can make sure you get the best possible care. It was a quiet, bloodless coup, a complete capture of my finances, my property, my will, and my own body. I stared at the papers, letting my eyes go wide and unfocused. Oh, I stammered, picking one up and letting it tremble in my hand. This is all so much. Fiduciary, I don't understand these words. I was playing the part of the senile old woman they so desperately wanted me to be, and deep down, some part of me reveled in the dark, twisted irony of it. As Mr. Davies droned on about fiduciary duty, the word debt snagged in my mind, and the present fell away, replaced by a memory so sharp it was like a shard of glass in my heart. Leo is 25, sitting at this very coffee table, his face buried in his hands. His first tech startup has just imploded. He's crying, real, heaving sobs of a man broken by his own ambition. It's all gone, Mom, he chokes out. The investor loans, the credit lines, I'm ruined. I'm over $200,000 in debt. I remember the feeling of my own heart breaking for him. I remember walking to this very secretary desk, my hands shaking as I wrote the check that would drain my savings, the money Richard had left for my own security. I remember his words as he took it. I'll pay you back every penny. Mom, I swear it. I'll make you proud. I came back to the present with a jolt, The debt was the motive. The promise was the lie. He wasn't trying to make me proud. He was trying to erase the debt by erasing me. And that will put your mind at ease. Mr. Davies was concluding, pushing an ornate fountain pen across the table towards me. You can just sign here, Eleanor. We can have it all taken care of today. Leo and Izzy leaned forward in unison, their eyes fixed on my hand. Their hunger was a physical presence in the room. This was the moment, the culmination of their entire, monstrous plan. My mind raced, recalling Miller's instructions. Do not sign anything. Find a way to delay. We need them to come back. I looked at the documents, then at their 3 expectant faces, and summoned the most convincing performance of my life. I let a single, genuine tear roll down my cheek, a tear for the son I had truly lost. This is so important, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Richard always told me to read everything. My head is just so foggy right now. I couldn't possibly. I looked up at Leo, my eyes wide and pleading. Can you come back tomorrow? Darling? I just want to read them properly, when my head is a little clearer. For you. The flash of frustration in Izzy's eyes was instantaneous, but she hid it quickly. Leo, ever the performer, arranged his face into a mask of deep understanding. Of course, Mom. Of course. Whatever you need. We'll come back tomorrow. They left, their satisfaction delayed but not denied. I stood motionless in the center of the room, listening to their car pull away. On the coffee table lay the stack of papers, a printed and notarized copy of my own death warrant. The serpent had made its offer, and tomorrow, I would invite it back into my home to spring the trap. The night before they were due to return was the longest of my life. My house, a place I once knew better than my own reflection, had been transformed into a theater of war. Detective Miller's tech team, 2 quiet, serious young people, moved through the rooms with a ghostly efficiency. They worked in near silence, their tools making only the softest clicks and whirs. A tiny camera lens, no bigger than a pen tip, was nestled among the spines of the history books on my bookshelf. Another was disguised as a new smoke detector on the ceiling. A microphone was hidden inside a decorative clock on the mantelpiece, its steady ticking now a countdown to a future I couldn't yet imagine. Everything is live, Miller told me in a low voice, standing by the front door before he left. We'll see and hear everything from a surveillance van down the street. You won't be alone for a second. He pressed a small, smooth stone into my hand. It looked like a simple worry stone. It's a panic button. Squeeze it if things go south before we have what we need. But Eleanor, you can do this. I spent the rest of the night in a state of suspended animation. Sleep an impossible luxury. I didn't see my home anymore. I saw camera angles. I didn't hear the house settling. I heard a live microphone. I was an actress, waiting for her cue in the most important performance of her life. The next morning, I did not dress as a victim. I bypassed the old, frail robe and instead chose a simple pair of gray trousers and a cashmere sweater, the color of cream. I brushed my hair until it shone and, for the first time in weeks, put on a touch of lipstick. I was not the confused, dying woman they expected. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was taking my house back. I sat in my armchair, the upside-down book from yesterday placed neatly on the table beside me, and I waited. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My heart gave a single, violent lurch, then settled into a slow, steady rhythm. I walked to the door, my steps measured and opened it. There they were, my son, my daughter-in-law, and their lawyer, their faces arranged in expressions of solemn concern. They looked like 3 crows ready to pick over a fresh kill. Eleanor, you look wonderful today, Izzy chirped, a little too brightly. The surprise in her eyes was a small, satisfying victory. She pushed a sleek, stainless steel thermos into my hands. I brought you some of my special calming chamomile tea. To help with your nerves. I wanted to laugh. She had brought a placebo to a poisoning. How thoughtful. Dear, I said, my voice smooth as glass. I led them into the living room. The stage. I could feel the invisible eyes of the cameras on us. The silent attention of the microphones. I was not alone. They took their seats, and Mr. Davies, with an air of grim finality, once again laid the documents on the coffee table. The fountain pen was placed precisely in the center. Well, Eleanor, the lawyer began, his purring voice filling the room. We're so glad you're feeling clearer today. Shall we proceed? He pushed the pen towards me. This was the moment. The cue. I ignored the pen. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and looked directly at my son. My voice, when I spoke, was not the weak, wavering whisper they were used to. It was the calm, clear, projecting voice of a professor addressing a lecture hall. Before I sign anything, I said, I have a question for you. Leo. The change in my demeanor was a physical shock that rippled through the room. Leo blinked, startled. Izzy's serene mask tightened. Mr. Davies frowned, his well-rehearsed script momentarily forgotten. It's about my health, I continued, letting the silence between each sentence stretch. This sudden decline I've been experiencing. It's a fascinating historical problem. The symptoms seem to have begun on a very specific date. The day after Izzy so kindly gave me those wonderful supplements. Mom, what are you talking about? Leo stammered, his eyes darting nervously towards Izzy. And Percy, I went on, my voice hardening. My poor cat. The vet was so puzzled. A massive, unexplained cardiac event, she said. In a perfectly healthy cat. He just happened to drink from my water glass that night. I paused, letting the implication land. You know, I've been feeling remarkably better the last 11 days. Stronger. Clearer. Ever since I stopped taking my daily dose. This is ridiculous, Mr. Self. Davies interjected, finding his footing. Eleanor, your children have warned me you've been prone to paranoid fantasies. It's a common symptom of cognitive decline. Am I paranoid? I asked, my gaze shifting to Izzy. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the armrest of her chair. Or am I just a good researcher? I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the sea green bottle, placing it next to the lawyer's documents. It looked like a weapon. I had a friend at the university's pharmacology department analyze the contents of one of these capsules. It's a brilliant formulation, mostly inert herbs, difficult to trace. But mixed in is a highly concentrated extract. Not hawthorn berry, as the label suggests. Something much more potent. Something that, in small, cumulative doses, systematically attacks the heart muscle and mimics a natural cardiac arrest. It was a complete and utter bluff. I hadn't tested a thing. But I was a historian, and I knew my subject. I knew their arrogance. Leo looked like he was about to be sick. Mr. Davies was speechless, his jaw slack. But Izzy began to laugh. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a high, brittle, hysterical sound that cracked the quiet of the room. You old fool, she hissed, the wellness guru mask shattering to reveal the sociopath beneath. You think you're so smart? He was never going to pay back that $200,000. He was never going to be the man you wanted him to be. You were just a bank account with an expiration date, and it was taking too damn long to expire. We were giving you a graceful exit. A peaceful way out, surrounded by your loving family, but you're too stubborn and stupid to even die right. Izzy, for God's sake. Shut up, Leo finally yelled, his face ashen. But I wasn't looking at them anymore. My gaze shifted to the bookshelf, to the tiny, dark, unblinking eye nestled between a biography of Churchill and a history of the Roman Empire. "I think you have everything you need, detective," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I hadn't felt in years. The front door exploded inwards, in a blur of motion. The room was filled with the dark blue uniforms of the Boston Police Department. David Miller was in the lead, his face a grim mask of resolve. The scene descended into a chaos of shouted commands and shrieking protests. Izzy screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure rage as an officer wrenched her hands behind her back. Leo simply crumpled, folding in on himself on my expensive Persian rug, sobs of pathetic self-pity racking his body. Mr. Davies stood frozen, his face a perfect portrait of a man whose carefully constructed world had just been obliterated. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs, snapping shut on my son's wrists, echoed in the sudden silence. It was the sound of a story ending. The sound of a cage door slamming shut. The sound of justice. I stood in the center of my violated living room as they were led away. Miller gave me a quiet, solemn nod. The immediate threat was gone. The battle was won. But as I watched the police car pull away, carrying the wreckage of my family, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. I looked at the spot on the rug where my son had wept, and I felt nothing at all. It was a vast, silent, hollowed-out space where a lifetime of love used to be. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that the silence was only just beginning. Once the cruisers and the ambulance, a purely procedural necessity for the lawyer, who claimed to be having heart palpitations, had pulled away, a different kind of team moved in. They were the quiet, methodical priests of a crime scene. Men and women in blue gloves who spoke in hushed tones, their work a somber, detached ballet of evidence collection. They photographed the living room from every conceivable angle, turning a space filled with a lifetime of my memories into a cold, geometric grid. They carefully bagged the sea green bottle, Izzy's thermos, the lawyer's pristine documents. They took the iPad, the fountain pen, the glass from my nightstand. I watched them from the doorway of the kitchen, a ghost in my own home. I felt nothing. It was as if the explosive events of the last hour had cauterized every nerve ending, leaving only a profound, hollow numbness. My house, my life, had been designated a crime scene, and I was now just a witness to its careful deconstruction. One of the technicians, a young woman with a kind face, offered me a bottle of water. I took it, my fingers feeling clumsy and disconnected from my brain. I was a historian observing a dig. Only the artifacts being unearthed were the shattered pieces of my own heart. The story broke the next morning. I didn't see it on television or read it online. The modern world, with its frantic, endless news cycle, reached me in the old-fashioned way. A phone call from a stunned friend from the university. Then another. And another. Detective Miller had warned me it would be a sensation, but I was unprepared for the vocabulary. Killer wellness guru. Influencer's poison plot. Betrayal in Boston suburbia. My private, agonizing tragedy had been turned into lurid, clickable entertainment for strangers. Reporters began camping out at the end of my driveway, their long-lensed cameras aimed at my front door like sniper rifles. My sanctuary had become a fishbowl. For 2 days, I existed in that fishbowl in a state of deep, insulating shock. The numbness was a mercy. I moved through the quiet, tainted rooms on autopilot. I made coffee I didn't drink. I opened books I didn't read. I would find myself standing in the living room, staring at the slight indentation in the carpet where Leo had knelt and wept. And I would feel absolutely nothing. The emotional epicenter of my life had been obliterated, and my mind refused to venture near the crater. David Miller came to see me on the 3rd day. He used the back door, letting himself in quietly. He found me in the kitchen, staring out the window at the autumn leaves, their brilliant colors, a cruel mockery of the gray landscape inside me. He didn't say much at first, just placed a steaming paper cup of coffee on the table in front of me. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sound, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The kitchen felt safer than the living room. It was a room of nourishment, not betrayal. The lab results came back this morning, he finally said, his voice gentle. It was exactly as we suspected. A massive concentration of oleandrin in the capsules. Enough that, over a few weeks, it would have induced irreversible cardiac failure. The medical examiner is certain it would have been ruled a heart attack. They would have gotten away with it. The official confirmation. The scientific certainty. It was a final, brutal nail in the coffin of any lingering, subconscious denial. And them? I asked, my voice a dry rustle. Izzy is playing the part of the wronged woman, claiming Leo manipulated her. It's not holding up. Her fingerprints are all over the online orders for the raw oleander extract, he said. Leo confessed to everything. A full, detailed confession. He's a wreck. We had to put him on suicide watch. He paused. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, has been disbarred pending his own trial. Turns out he specialized in this kind of predatory estate planning. You weren't his first target. The numbness inside me finally began to crack. A single, agonizing question pushed its way through the fog. Did he, in his confession, did he ever say he was sorry? David? I had to know. I had to hear that some small piece of the boy I had raised still existed within the monster he had become. Was he sorry for what he did to me? David looked down at his hands, then met my gaze with an expression of deep, human sorrow. His honesty was the cruelest, kindest gift he could have given me. He was sorry he got caught. Eleanor, he said softly. He was terrified of going to prison. The confession wasn't about remorse. It was about trying to get a better deal. And that was it. That was the truth that finally broke me. The shock receded, and the grief, an immense, tidal wave of it, crashed over me. I lowered my head into my hands, and for the first time since it all began, I wept. They were not the loud, hysterical sobs of Izzy's staged performance, but the silent, wrenching tears of a truly broken heart. I cried for the little boy who had scraped his knee and sought my arms for comfort. I cried for the young man whose future I had believed in. I cried for the mother I had been, whose unconditional love had been mistaken for unconditional funds. I cried for the beautiful, sun-drenched lie my family had been. But as the storm of grief subsided, something else surfaced, quiet and unexpected. It was relief. The terrifying, exhausting performance was over. The daily dread, the constant vigilance, the fear that had been my shadow for weeks, it was gone. I had survived. The knowledge was not triumphant, it was humbling. I finally looked up, wiping my eyes. What happens now? David watched me, his expression full of a warmth that went beyond his professional duty. Now, he said, you get to decide what the rest of your life looks like. My gaze drifted from the kitchen, towards the archway that led to the living room, to the rest of the house. Every room was a chapter in a history book I no longer wanted to read. The memories weren't just bittersweet anymore, they were poisoned, radioactive. A historian's job is to preserve the past, I said, my voice hoarse. But I'm beginning to think that some parts of the past shouldn't be preserved. They should be demolished. When David left, a fragile quiet settled over the house once more. But it was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the predatory silence of dread, or the hollow silence of shock. It was the vast, clean silence of an empty space, a blank page. The grief was a physical weight in my chest, but for the first time, it felt like my own. I had survived the battle. Now, I had to figure out how to live in the peace that followed. 6 months later, the world looks different. It sounds and smells different, too. I am not sitting in the suffocating silence of my Boston home. I am on a small, sun-drenched terrace in Florence, a city that has mastered the art of wearing its history with a graceful, enduring beauty. The air smells of espresso and blooming jasmine. In the distance, the terracotta dome of the Duomo rises against a painfully blue sky, a testament to what human beings can build rather than what they can destroy. The only ticking sound is the gentle clink of my spoon against my cappuccino cup. The screen of my iPad, the very device that once served as a tablet of damning evidence, lights up with an incoming call. The face that appears is no longer a source of dread, but one of genuine friendship. "Professor," David Miller says, his smile warm through the pixelated screen. "It looks like Italy agrees with you." David," I say, smiling back. It's hard to argue with a city that considers art a public utility. "How are things back home?" His expression becomes a little more serious. "I thought you'd want to know. It's over." They both took plea bargains rather than face a jury. Izzy got 20 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Leo got 15. With good behavior, he might be out in 12. 12 years. The number sounds both impossibly long and shockingly short. I feel a flicker of something, but it is a distant, academic echo of an old pain, not a fresh wound. He is no longer my cross to bear. He is just a case number now, a file in a cabinet, a piece of someone else's history. "Thank you for telling me," I say, and I mean it. It is the closing of a book. "More importantly," he says, his smile returning, "how is the project coming along?" I turn the iPad to show him the stacks of folders and legal pads on the table beside me. The Percy Project is officially a registered nonprofit. I tell him, a surge of quiet pride warming me more than the Tuscan sun. We have our first 2 cases. A man in Newton whose nephew has been helping him with his investments, and a woman in Quincy whose daughter is trying to have her declared incompetent. The lawyers I've hired are sharks. David. The very best kind. I had sold the house. The sale was swift. The closing impersonal. I walked away from the polished mahogany and the creaking floors without a backward glance. A portion of the proceeds, a significant one, now funds the foundation I created in my cat's name. His small, innocent life, so cruelly taken, would now be a shield for others. His death would have meaning. It was the only way I knew how to make it right. "That's incredible, Eleanor," David says, his voice full of sincere admiration. "You've built something that will last. It's what historians are supposed to do, isn't it?" I reply. "Learn from the past to build a better future." We say our goodbyes. 2 friends connected across an ocean. And I end the call. I am alone again on my terrace. But the loneliness is a peaceful, expansive thing, not a hollow ache. I look out at the Ponte Vecchio, a bridge that has stood for centuries, surviving floods and wars, a silent witness to the endless, churning river of human life. I spent so much of my life believing my value was tied to my role as a wife, as a mother. My love was a resource to be given, and I gave it so freely I didn't realize it was simply being taken. I didn't lose a son in that living room. The truth is, I never really had one. I was the loving custodian of an idea, a memory of a little boy who grew into a hollow man. The grief I felt was for the lie, not for the reality. My greatest mistake was ignoring my own instincts. I ignored the historian inside me who whispered that the narrative didn't add up, that the facts were being manipulated. The deepest, most essential truth I've learned is this: you must be the primary source for your own life. You must listen to your own testimony. I pick up the sketchbook that is now my constant companion. I am not a great artist, but it doesn't matter. It is the act of looking, of truly seeing what is in front of me, that feels like a miracle. I look at the ancient, resilient city, at the light on the water, at the faces of strangers laughing at a nearby cafe. My hand, which once trembled with fear, is now steady. I touch the charcoal pencil to the clean, white page, and I begin to draw. I am not sketching the past. I am capturing the beautiful, fragile, and finally, blessedly, my own present. It is never too late to reclaim your own story, protect your peace, and redefine your future on your own terms. Your well-being must always be your most sacred trust. If this message resonated with you, please consider sharing it. You never know who in your life might need a reminder that their voice matters most. Wishing you a future filled with strength, clarity, and genuine love.